My name is Ava Monroe. At 30, I vanished. Not from the world, not from death, but from the life I'd spent 10 years building. The headlines didn't say she was framed. They said young CFO at Sterling Capital resigns amid billion-dollar scandal. They printed my photo, the same one from Forbes 30 under 30. They said I had the face of betrayal. What they didn't print. The truth. But we'll get there. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in Manhattan in a penthouse that overlooked the East River but never saw the morning sun. My father, Charles Monroe, was a Wall Street legend, co founder of Sterling Capital, a private equity giant with over $80 billion in assets under management. My mother, Victoria, was a philanthropist. That's what the magazines called her. In reality, she ran fundraisers and whispered to board members about where the real opportunities lay. Everything in our home was sculpted from power: quiet, polished, ruthless. And in that world, there were two rules: perception is reality, weakness is betrayal. I learned early that being smart wasn't enough, not in a family like mine. You had to be undeniable. My older brother, Chase Monroe, was groomed to take over Sterling from the time he could tie a tie. He was charming, loud, fearless, all things I wasn't. I was quiet, precise, calculating. The one who stayed late, checked the numbers twice, and asked questions no one wanted to answer. By age 18, I'd already interned at three major hedge funds. At 24, I graduated top of my class from Wharton. By 26, I was hired as the youngest CFO in Sterling Capital history. Chase joked we gave her the job to keep her from burning the place down. But my father, he just nodded like it was expected, like I was a well trained asset. He never said I'm proud, just don't screw it up. The scandal broke 2 years later. A shell fund named Tyrex Holdings, owned by one of our overseas portfolios, collapsed in Singapore. Losses $1.2 billion. Allegations: fraud, misappropriation, regulatory evasion. Sterling was exposed. The SEC got involved, and suddenly everyone wanted someone to blame. And that someone was me. They said I signed off on the wire transfers. They said I ignored the audit warnings. They said my silence was negligence. What I didn't say at the time was that the Tyrex fund had been created under the direct orders of the board, a shortcut to pump quarterly earnings with inflated offshore revenue. I didn't say the trail of sign-offs had been altered. I didn't say Chase had been the architect, that he'd called it creative liquidity. And I didn't say my father had approved it in a closed-door meeting 2 weeks before it exploded, because I had no proof. They made sure of that. The board met without me. 3 hours later, I was offered a choice: resign quietly or be named in the SEC filing. They said it was to protect the brand. They said it was nothing personal. They said I'd still get my severance, $3 million in hush money. But what they didn't say, what they didn't realize, was that I'd already seen everything. Every edited timestamp, every forced signature, every accidental email deletion. I'd archived it all, and then I walked. The day I resigned, I stood outside Sterling's glass tower for 10 minutes in the February cold, watching my breath rise like smoke. No one followed me. No one called. The girl from reception didn't even look up as I left. That night, news broke. Every outlet, every push notification. Sterling CFO Ava Monroe steps down amid financial irregularities. Once the darling of Wall Street, Ava Monroe now faces serious questions. I didn't cry. I just packed a bag, deleted my socials, and got on a flight to nowhere. I spent the next 2 years in Oregon, in a town with no skyline and no hedge funds. I worked as a freelance analyst for small tech firms. No titles, no spotlight, just numbers. And I liked it that way, but every so often I'd still check the news. Chase had taken over as interim CEO of Sterling. My father stayed on the board. The firm was restructuring. Profits were up, the world forgot me. But I hadn't forgotten them. Because in a secure, encrypted drive stored in a safe deposit box under a false name in Denver, I had everything. The ledger they tried to erase, the evidence they said didn't exist, the truth they buried with my name on the tombstone. And someday I'd use it. Not for revenge, for correction. 3 years after the fall, I started building again. This time in secret. I partnered with a boutique investment firm out of Austin. People who had left Wall Street in disgust, like me. I helped them build algorithms for ethical investing, clean portfolios, transparent capital, no shadow tricks, no hidden funds. By year 2, we had $1 billion under management. By year 3, we were outperforming Sterling. That's when I got the call. A blocked number. A familiar voice. Ava, it's Mom. Victoria Monroe hadn't spoken to me since the scandal. Now she sounded fragile, something I never imagined hearing. Your father's health is declining, she said quietly, and there's something you need to know. I hesitated. The Ava who left Manhattan would have hung up, but the Ava I'd become. She listened. What is it? I asked. Pause, a long, painful pause. There's a will, she said. One that was changed after you left. My pulse slowed. And it concerns you, she added. You need to come home. That night, I opened the encrypted drive. Everything was still there. The files, the recordings, the truth. And as I stared at the screen, a thought struck me. Quiet but thunderous. They thought they erased me. But I wasn't gone. I was evolving, and now it was time to return. Not to beg, to reveal. When I stepped off the plane at JFK, it had been 1,478 days since I'd last touched New York soil. Almost 4 years since the headlines buried me. Almost 4 years since the city I once ran from the 92nd floor spat me out like a faulty algorithm. The air smelled the same. Metallic wind, grease, ambition. But I wasn't the same. I wasn't the 20-something prodigy trying to prove herself to the Monroe men. I wasn't the corporate casualty who walked away in silence. I was a woman with receipts. A woman with a plan. A black town car waited at the curb. My mother's doing, no doubt. Miss Monroe, the driver asked, eyeing me curiously. That name still landed like ice in my spine. But I nodded. The ride from the airport to the Upper East Side was quiet. Familiar streets blurred by tinted glass. Landmarks of a past life I no longer claimed. I watched the skyline rise into view. Steel, glass, power. All things I once believed made someone untouchable. Now I knew better. Steel rusts, glass shatters. And power can be rewritten. The Monroe brownstone stood like a museum, polished, perfect, and frozen in a version of the past. No one dared update. I stepped inside, greeted by silence and the faint smell of lavender cleaner. A maid I didn't recognize nodded politely and motioned to the stairs. He's waiting. I climbed slowly, each step heavier than the last. At the top of the landing, I paused before opening the door to my father's study. Once that room was his throne. Dark wood, leather chairs, and a custom-built desk the size of a small car. Now it was a hospital suite in disguise. The desk was gone. A hospital bed stood in its place, machines humming quietly, IV lines, oxygen tanks, medication carts, and in the center of it all, Charles Monroe, thinner, paler, smaller, but still unmistakably him. His eyes met mine, cold, sharp. Then something flickered, something uncertain. Ava, he said it like a fact, not a greeting. Dad. A long pause followed. You came, he said finally. I got Mom's call. He didn't respond right away, just studied me like I was an investment pitch. He didn't quite believe. You look older, he said. Harder. Life has a way of doing that. Victoria entered the room a few minutes later, perfectly composed in silk and pearls, as if nothing had ever cracked the Monroe legacy. She kissed my cheek like we hadn't gone radio silent for 4 years. I'm glad you came, she whispered. Tell me about the will. She blinked but didn't flinch. Straight to business, just like Charles had trained us all. There was a revision, she said. 2 years ago, after the scandal, my jaw clenched. Let me guess. I was removed. Her eyes dropped briefly. Your father said it was to protect the family. From what? Me? From instability. Charles cut in. From perception. We couldn't afford to look divided. I stared at him. You couldn't afford to look at the truth. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. The updated will left everything. Company shares, trust assets, properties to Chase. Not a single line about me. Not even a conditional clause. I was erased on paper as completely as I had been in real life. But here's the part they didn't expect. I didn't come back for the will. I came for the ledger. 2 nights later, I requested a meeting with my mother alone. We sat in the upstairs sunroom, her favorite place, surrounded by blooming orchids and French doors that let in the spring breeze. I opened a black leather folder and placed it between us. What's this? She asked, reaching cautiously. Proof, I said, of what they did, of how they made me take the fall. Inside were copies, not originals, of the documents from the encrypted drive, wire logs, altered audits, internal emails, recordings, everything they tried to scrub, everything I preserved. Victoria turned each page slowly, eyes widening, her hand trembling slightly as she realized what she was holding. You kept this, she whispered. Yes, you could have buried them. I still could. She looked at me then. Really looked. Not as a daughter. Not as a liability. But as someone with leverage. With power. What do you want, Ava? Her voice was low. Careful. I want to meet with Chase, I said. And I want him to know I'm not coming for revenge. I'm coming to take what's mine. The next morning, Chase agreed to meet. At the Sterling Capitol Tower. Of course. He sent his assistant to arrange it. Same as always. I wore a charcoal suit. No jewelry. Hair back. Neutral lipstick. Polished. Controlled. Dangerous. Chase met me in his glass office overlooking Midtown. The same office that used to belong to our father. He smiled like we were at brunch. Well, if it isn't Wall Street's most elegant ghost. I sat without invitation. Still smug. I see. He leaned back in his chair. It's been what? 4 years. You look intense. You look like a man still hiding something. His grin faltered just slightly.
Oh,
What do you want, Ava? I want the truth on the record. I want a public correction. He snorted. You think I'm going to give you that? You will, I said calmly, placing a slim drive on his desk. Because if you don't, this goes to the press, and the SEC, and the Ethics Review Board at NYSE. He didn't touch the drive, but I saw the tension in his jaw. I kept quiet for 4 years. I said, now you're going to listen. Then I laid it out. Tyrex Holdings, the offshore accounts, the manipulated audits, the missing compliance logs, the IP stamps on the edit history from his login. I have more, I said. Originals, witness affidavits, timeline analysis, all stored in secure servers under legal protection. Chase stared at me, pale now. Why now? He asked. Because I finally learned, I said. You don't beat people like you by playing the game. You beat them by rewriting the rules. I gave him a deadline. 30 days. to issue a statement exonerating me, to adjust the internal records, to correct the legacy, or the box would be opened publicly. I don't want your money, I said as I left. I want the truth. That night I sat alone in my rented flat in Tribeca. I looked out at the city that once swallowed me whole. But now I was different. Not a fallen name. Not a forgotten story. I was a reckoning. And the clock was ticking. For the next 3 days, silence reigned. No statement from Sterling. No retraction in the press. No contact from Chase. But I knew what silence meant in the world I came from. It meant scrambling. It meant lawyers in conference rooms at 2 a.m. It meant denial drafting and damage control. They were afraid. And fear in the Monroe world was the first crack in the armor. On the fourth morning I got the email. Subject line. Possible resolution. Confidential meeting request. It came from Sterling Legal Affairs, with an invite for a private off-site conversation. Location and address in Soho. Time 7 p.m. Attendees. Senior counsel, third-party advisor. No names. No sender signature. But I knew this move. This was Chase trying to contain the fallout, to control the terms. I accepted the meeting, but I didn't go alone. At 6:30 p.m., I met Jordan Kessler outside the building. Harvard Law, SEC investigator turned whistleblower consultant. I'd hired her 3 years ago, right after the scandal. She'd been with me from day one, vetting files, verifying timelines, building a silent arsenal. Now she would be my legal witness, my firewall, and my mirror, in case I forgot who I was doing this for. The meeting space was sleek and sterile, polished steel, abstract art, corporate diplomacy at its finest. Chase wasn't there. Instead, Sterling's general counsel, Peter Maddox, sat with a neutral face and a laptop. Beside him a woman I recognized instantly, Clara Fielding, former board member, now independent director, the only one who'd abstained from voting when I was forced out. She'd been quiet in the aftermath, but I'd never believed she'd stayed silent by choice. She gave me a look, not of pity, not of apology, but of respect. Miss Monroe, Maddox began, nodding stiffly. We're here to discuss your proposal. You mean my ultimatum, I said evenly, sliding a folder across the table. Call it what it is. He hesitated. Clara broke the silence. We've reviewed the materials. The evidence is substantial, undeniable, Jordan added, and admissible. Peter flinched. Clara continued. Chase has reviewed it as well. He acknowledges that key decisions were misrepresented, and that your role was mischaracterized. So I said, folding my hands, what does that mean in English? Peter leaned forward. We're prepared to offer a private written statement, clearing your name, internally and externally, and to restore any reputational harm through a neutral press release, acknowledging your contributions, and clarifying the events. I raised an eyebrow. No mention of guilt. No mention of who created Tyrex Holdings. Clara stepped in gently. You'd be surprised how much truth you can tell without naming the guilty. If your goal is justice, not punishment. Her words sat with me, because that had always been the line. I didn't want revenge. I wanted correction. But Chase walking away untouched, that wasn't justice. That was still manipulation. I slid another sheet across the table. I want the internal memo published. Full context. I want Sterling's board minutes corrected. And I want to be acknowledged publicly by name, not as some former executive. Peter opened his mouth to object. Jordan cut in. And if not, the package goes public. All of it. SEC, DOJ, Financial Times, Vox, Forbes, and every outlet with a headline slot. Peter deflated slightly.
But Clara smiled, just faintly. I'll see to it personally, she said. Her voice was firm, her tone final. After the meeting, Jordan and I walked 2 blocks in silence. Then she turned to me. You could have burned them down, Ava. You still could. I know, I said. But you didn't. I didn't come to burn the house down. I said quietly. I came to rebuild it. The right way. That night I sat on my hotel balcony, looking over the city that once tried to erase me, and I thought about what came next. Reputation. Check. Redemption. In motion. But legacy? Legacy required more than a cleared name. Legacy required impact. And I knew just where to start. 2 weeks later, I stood in the offices of Lumen Equity, the ethical investing firm I helped build in Austin. Now we had 3 floors in New York, and I was CEO. We'd kept a low profile for years, letting performance speak louder than branding. But now it was time to step out of the shadows. Our rebrand launched on a Tuesday morning. Lumen Equity appoints Ava Monroe as CEO, amid expansion into urban redevelopment and ESG innovation. The financial world blinked. Ava Monroe, the exiled Monroe daughter, was back. And not just back, leading. Sterling's press release came the next day. Former CFO Ava Monroe's contributions clarified an internal review. It was everything I'd demanded, everything they'd denied me, until they had no choice. That same week, Clara Fielding reached out privately. She wanted a meeting. We met at a cafe in Tribeca. No suits, no staff, just 2 women with too many secrets and too much in common. She stirred her coffee carefully before speaking. You know, I wanted to vote against your dismissal, she said. Why didn't you? My vote would have been overruled, and I wouldn't have been able to help you from the inside. You helped. Let's just say, not all board minutes are as confidential as they seem. I smiled. You ever consider leaving Sterling? She raised an eyebrow. I'm building something. I said, a fund. Women-led. Transparency first. Impact-focused. We're calling it Phoenix Capital. Clara's smile was slow, calculated. The way people smile when they're seriously considering setting fire to the old order. I'm listening, she said. That night I added a name to the growing list of allies. Not people who owed me, people who believed in me. The difference was everything. 3 months after the Sterling statement went public, the world forgot I was ever accused. But I hadn't. I didn't build Phoenix Capital to erase the past. I built it to prove something. Not to them, to me. That I could rise without their name. That I could create something from scratch. Something cleaner, clearer and louder than the whispers they'd once buried me with. Something that couldn't be ignored. Phoenix Capital opened in a sunlit loft in Brooklyn. No marble floors. No paintings of dead financiers. Just exposed beams, glass walls, and the hum of possibility. My first hires, all women, economists, strategists, architects of capital who had been overlooked, underestimated, or outright pushed out of firms like Sterling. Our motto was simple: transparent power, relentless purpose. We didn't just invest, we built green infrastructure, urban renewal, education access, women-led startups, community housing models, with double-digit ROI. I wasn't chasing Wall Street anymore. I was redefining it, and the numbers spoke louder than any legacy surname. On our launch day, Clara Fielding stood at my side in an off-the-record advisory role. 3 former Sterling analysts sent anonymous thank you messages. And Forbes? They called me the Phoenix of Finance. Fitting, because fire once feared had become the tool I used to forge something new. But power attracts attention, and not always the kind you expect. It started with an invitation. A white envelope slipped under my office door. No stamp, No signature. Inside a single handwritten note. Meet me where it started. Midnight. Come alone. On the back an address. The 92nd floor of Sterling Capital. The same office I'd once walked out of in disgrace. I didn't go immediately. First I checked security feeds. Phoenix Capital had installed network tools that could track digital signatures. The note had been written with a Sterling-issued pen, a rare custom model Chase had gifted to top-level execs 5 years earlier, which meant someone inside Sterling had written it. But who? Chase. Unlikely. Too theatrical. Too personal. My father? Even more unlikely. He was in recovery and barely speaking to press, let alone passing secret notes, which left one possibility: an ally, or a traitor. Either way, I had to know. I arrived at Sterling Skyscraper at 11:57 p.m., wearing black slacks, a gray trench coat and flats. Practical, quiet. The building was dark, except for emergency lights. But the 92nd floor? Lit. Barely. A faint glow from a desk lamp in the corner. The elevator dinged. I stepped out. The office looked the same. Cold. Clinical. Unfeeling. And then I saw him. Thomas Quinn. Chase's former right hand. Sterling's VP of Portfolio Strategy. And someone I hadn't spoken to since the night I left. He looked thinner now. Hair slightly graying at the temples. But the same sharp eyes. Intelligent. Calculating. He stood near the window. Back to me. Gazing out over Manhattan. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. You left a creepy note. I was curious. He smiled faintly, turning to face me. I've been watching you, Ava. That doesn't make this sound better. I mean your work. Lumen. Phoenix. The Sterling correction. You've changed the narrative. No, I said, stepping forward. I took it back. He nodded. You always saw the angles, even when no one else did. I folded my arms. Why am I here, Thomas? He hesitated. Then finally, I want out. Those 3 words cracked a silence. Out of what? Sterling, he said. The board. The lies. The cover-ups. Chase has plans. Aggressive ones. He's pushing Sterling into partnerships with shadow investors. High risk, low transparency stuff. Offshore again. I narrowed my eyes. Didn't he learn the first time? He thinks he's untouchable now. Especially since your name was cleared. And the company didn't implode. So I'm his insurance policy. Exactly. I exhaled. And you? I don't want to burn like you almost did, he said. But I don't want to be part of this, either. What do you want from me? He stepped forward slowly, and handed me a flash drive. Data, meetings, draft deals, emails Chase thinks he deleted. It's all here. I've been collecting it quietly. Why not take it to the SEC? Because I'm implicated. Not by action. By knowledge. I didn't stop it. And I don't trust them not to make me the next you. His voice cracked for just a moment. I didn't speak up 4 years ago. I won't make that mistake again. I took the drive. And I watched him walk away. Back into the shadows of the only world he knew. For now, back at Phoenix HQ. I stayed up till 3 a.m. reviewing the files. Thomas wasn't lying. Shell company schematics. Loophole contracts. Multiple countries. Untraceable accounts. And one name kept showing up in the transactions. Ava Monroe. My cousin. The golden boy from London. Head of Sterling Europe. Smarter than Chase. Quieter than me. And apparently dirtier than all of us. He was the architect of the new scheme. The next generation of deception. And the worst part? He was succeeding. By morning I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to build Phoenix. Now I had to protect it. From people who wore the same name I did. From the legacy I once wanted to reclaim. I needed a firewall. So I called a meeting. Not with Sterling. Not with lawyers. with Clara, and with 4 rising women from the finance world. Women I'd mentored, watched, trusted. Together we formed the Founders Circle, an informal coalition to track corporate corruption from the inside out. Clara would bring board intelligence. Jordan Kessler would build legal structure. Phoenix would fund it. And we would operate like no woman-led finance group ever had. No PR, no panels, just quiet control. And from that moment on, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about redemption anymore. This was about rewriting the architecture of power itself, brick by brick, ledger by ledger, truth by truth. The Monroes built their empire on secrets. I'd build mine on sunlight. 3 weeks after Thomas Quinn gave me the flash drive, Phoenix Capital was ready to make its boldest move yet. The project was codenamed Sora, short for Sustainable Opportunity, Real Accountability. It was more than a portfolio. It was a blueprint. We were launching a $500 million clean investment fund, focused on transforming overlooked U.S. cities, places gutted by corporate greed, redlining, and failed industrial promises. We weren't just putting capital into these communities. We were giving equity back to the people who lived there. Revenue sharing housing, solar powered public spaces, locally owned co-ops, transparency at every level. And for the first time, we weren't playing quietly. At the press conference, I stood in front of a crowded room at the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan. Behind me, a glowing screen displayed the Sora logo in soft green and gold. To my left, Clara Fielding, and 3 of our community partners from Detroit, Baton Rouge, and Stockton. To my right, Jordan Kessler, now our official chief legal strategist. The room was filled with reporters from CNBC, Bloomberg, Fast Company, and Wired. I took a breath, then began. For decades, investment has meant taking, extracting, profiting, not partnering. That model is broken. Sora is the antidote. We're not just investing in opportunity. We're demanding accountability to the planet, to the people, to the future. The applause came fast. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Headlines were already forming in real time. Ava Monroe rewrites the Capital playbook. Phoenix Capital bets big on community power. From exile to empire, Monroe's return shakes Wall Street again. It felt like vindication. But I should have known better. With every step into the light, a shadow waits. That night, I was reviewing project timelines at my Tribeca apartment when my phone buzzed.
No caller ID. Normally I ignored those, but something told me to pick up. I answered. The voice was familiar, measured, cold. You should stop while you're ahead, Ava. I froze. Who is this? You know who this is. And you know exactly what we're capable of? A chill ran down my spine. You're calling to threaten me. I'm calling to remind you, the voice said, that not everyone plays by your new rules. Sora puts you in our way. That's not a place you want to be. Click. They hung up. I stared at the screen. No number, no trace. But I already knew. Ellis, or someone working for him. I called Jordan. Within an hour, our office building's security system was upgraded. Digital protocols doubled. Legal documentation encrypted behind 4 layers of firewalls. We didn't just protect secrets anymore. We protected people. I sent the recording of the call to Clara. She called back instantly. Ellis? She asked. Could be. Or Chase. She paused. I warned you, Ava. The Monroe men don't lose well. But something about that voice. It wasn't quite Ellis. Not his cadence. Not his arrogance. It was someone else. And then I remembered. 3 years earlier, during my last few months at Sterling, I'd attended a retreat in London hosted by Delcor Investment Group. a shadow firm known for laundering wealth under philanthropic cover. Ellis had been there. So had a man named Richard Tan, a private equity fixer from Singapore who specialized in restructuring. He was sharp, quiet, deadly. And that voice on the phone? I was sure it was him, which meant Ellis had outsourced his threats, which meant he was truly afraid. We were on to something big, something that didn't just threaten his money, it threatened his control. 2 days later, we got a tip. A contact at the Department of Energy forwarded us a whistleblower report filed anonymously. Delcor and partners seeking to derail Phoenix Sora Fund. Internal memos suggest coordinated sabotage through media manipulation, regulatory pressure, and private buyout attempts. They were trying to stop us before we got too big to contain. That's when I knew. We couldn't just defend Phoenix anymore. We had to go public with the full truth. So I made a decision I once swore I wouldn't. I sent the Tyrex files to the New York Times. All of it. The shell companies, the doctored emails, the board minutes, the recordings, the flash drive Thomas Quinn had handed over. It came with a note. They buried the truth to protect their name. Now let the truth bury their lies. Ava Monroe. The article hit like a shockwave. The Monroe cover-up. How Sterling Capital sacrificed a whistleblower to protect the next generation of greed. Names were named. Faces were published. Voices, mine and others who had stayed silent, were finally heard. The fallout was swift. Ellis Monroe resigned. Chase Monroe was placed under federal investigation. Richard Tan's U.S. operations were frozen pending inquiry. But that wasn't the headline I cared about. This was Ava Monroe not just cleared, celebrated. In the weeks that followed, my inbox flooded with emails from young professionals, students, single mothers, retirees, people who had been cast aside by systems that saw them as numbers, not humans. You gave us hope. I showed your speech to my daughter. I left my job at a toxic firm because of you. That was legacy. That was the impact my father never understood. Speaking of Charles Monroe, one evening as the sun dipped over the Hudson, I got a text from my mother. He's asking for you, just to talk. I didn't answer right away. The last time we'd spoken, I told him I didn't want an apology. I wanted change. Maybe that's what this was. Or maybe not. But I had to find out. He was in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, thinner than before, quieter. The monitors beeped softly around him. You're making noise out there, he said with a faint smile. I folded my arms. You always said perception is reality. I was wrong. I blinked. I measured success by what I built. But you're showing the world what it means to build better. I didn't respond. Not yet. He continued. I read the Times piece, all of it, and for once, I'm proud of something I had no part in. I felt my throat tighten, but I held it back. We sat in silence for a long time. Then he added, You've built more than I ever did, Ava. Not in size, in meaning. When I left the hospital, the city felt different. Not softer, not safer, but clearer. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. Phoenix Capital's boardroom. My team sat around the table. Clara, Jordan, our founders, and 2 new advisors from cities we'd just greenlit. I stood at the head of the table, holding the next blueprint. Phoenix International. Our mission: take this model global. Build equity in Cape Town. Power projects in Kolkata. Female-led investment circles in Sao Paulo. It wouldn't be easy. It wasn't supposed to be. But I had something no one could take now. Not Chase, not Ellis, not even my father. I had truth backed by evidence. I had vision powered by clarity. And I had a team forged by fire. They tried to bury me, but they forgot one thing. Phoenixes aren't buried. They rise. 6 months after the Sora launch, Phoenix Capital went global. The moment I stepped onto the balcony of our new office in Cape Town, South Africa, I felt it. This was no longer about reclaiming a name. This was a movement. Phoenix International launched with a $1.2 billion fund, backed by major ESG investors, sovereign allies, and community stakeholders across 4 continents. We weren't just building projects, we were rewriting blueprints for how capital flowed, who it served, and who it empowered. We opened in Cape Town, renewable energy in townships Jakarta, women-led microloan cooperatives Lisbon, green housing converted from abandoned industrial sites, Sao Paulo, a public-private fund targeting youth entrepreneurship. We weren't just investing in places, we were investing in people. But growth has gravity, and gravity draws shadows, especially when money crosses oceans, especially when power starts looking like threat. My first red flag came from Clara. She was on the ground in Lisbon, overseeing the legal side of a large land transfer agreement. She texted me at 2:14 a.m. Need to talk. Something's off in Portugal. Local council being pressured. External interference likely. Not random. I FaceTimed her the next morning. Her hair was pulled back, dark circles under her eyes. I've been getting stonewalled on permits, she said. And someone's been asking about you. Who? She hesitated. An advisor to the Delcor European Group, connected to Sterling's old partners. I froze. You think Ellis is pulling strings from exile? I think exile doesn't mean what we thought it did. A week later, we got confirmation. Ellis Monroe was no longer in London. He was operating through a dummy corporation out of Dubai, quietly buying up distressed international real estate. Several of the sites were within miles of our projects, and more importantly, he'd started a new firm, Vanguard Horizon Capital. It sounded noble, global, safe, but it wasn't. It was Sterling 2.0, offshore-backed, loophole-funded, and directly in our path. I called a meeting in Phoenix HQ's Global Strategy Room. We projected a map of Ellis's operations onto the screen. Green dots for Phoenix, red dots for Vanguard. Too many overlaps. He's mirroring us, Jordan said. Like a parasite. He's counter-investing, Clara added. Same cities, same demographics, but with bait and switch funding. What's the angle? Asked Renata, our Sao Paulo coordinator. I took a deep breath. Simple. Undercut us. Flood our market. Poison our reputation with false ESG claims, and buy out our partners before we stabilize. Classic Monroe, Clara muttered. No, I said quietly. It's not Monroe. It's war. For weeks we fought back. We solidified contracts, doubled down on transparency, sent advance teams into communities before Vanguard could poison the well. But then came the breach. One Thursday morning, at 8:32 a.m., our Lisbon team's servers were hit. Internal documents leaked. Blueprints, financial models, vendor contacts. At first we thought it was a cyber attack. But then Jordan discovered the access log. The login came from inside Phoenix, from a credential belonging to our Singapore project coordinator, Daniel Young. Daniel was sharp, quiet, and polite to the point of invisibility. I remembered interviewing him. MIT grad. Grew up in a working-class family in Kowloon. Brilliant modeler. I called him into my office immediately. He looked calm. Too calm. Daniel, I said, sliding the printed logs across the table. Why were you accessing restricted Lisbon project files from Singapore at 2 a.m.? He glanced down, said nothing. Then finally, I had to betray us. No, he said, voice low. I had to pay off a debt. He looked up, shame written across his face. My sister's tuition, my mother's surgeries, they offered a number I couldn't refuse. I didn't sell everything, just enough. My stomach turned. You leaked blueprints to Ellis? He nodded. Slowly. I didn't think he'd use it like this.
I thought it was insurance. You thought wrong. We suspended Daniel, but I didn't go public with it. Not yet. Why? Because I saw my younger self in his eyes. Trapped, desperate, outmaneuvered. I'd been betrayed too, but I'd also been blamed for mistakes I didn't make. I wasn't about to become the kind of leader who crushed people without understanding them. Still, I had to protect Phoenix. So I called a private meeting with Ava Monroe. Yes, I initiated it. Why? Because every system has a center, and if you want to collapse an empire, you go to the architect. We met in Geneva, neutral ground, private hotel suite, no press, no teams, just the two of us. Ellis hadn't changed much. Pressed suit, Rolex, eyes like ice behind glass. Nice of you to reach out, cousin, he said. I didn't sit. Why Lisbon? Why now? He chuckled. Why not? You're rising too fast. No oversight. No leash. That terrifies people. People like you. People with money to lose, he said simply. I stepped closer. Vanguard's a ghost company. Shells on shells. You think no one will trace it. I think no one has the guts to go public with it. Not after what the world already did to you once. I stared him down. I don't need the world's permission. I have the truth. I have data, and I have reach. He stood, closing the space between us. You always had fight, Ava, but let me offer you a choice. I'm listening. You walk away, sell Phoenix to a friendly firm. You retire rich. Or you keep pushing, and this gets ugly. I tilted my head. It already is. I walked out, and that same night, I authorized Phoenix's most radical act yet. We published a full transparency dossier on Vanguard Horizon. We uploaded every financial trace, every shell corp, every registered proxy, every ethics violation and fund link to Ellis. Open source, no lawyers. No filters, just raw truth. And then we sent it to every investor Ellis had tried to court. The next day, 6 firms pulled funding. 3 governments opened investigations. 1 news outlet ran the headline, "The Phoenix Strikes Back." Daniel Young sent me an email from a secure address. I read the report. I was wrong. If you'll let me, I want to help make this right. I forwarded it to Jordan. Start vetting him for reinstatement. I wrote, he may still be one of us. Phoenix stood taller than ever. Lisbon was saved. Cape Town expanded. Jakarta doubled its enrollment rate for girls in STEM schools. But what mattered most? We weren't just surviving Ellis. We were beating him. Not with fear. Not with revenge. With resilience. By the time spring reached Manhattan, Phoenix Capital had become a symbol, not just of success, but of defiance. Every article, every speech, every groundbreaking project had reshaped how the public saw me. Once a disgraced executive, now a visionary CEO, a builder, a reformer, and nothing scares the old guard more than a woman who wins without playing by their rules. So, they changed the rules. It started small. A story planted in a fringe online outlet. A blurry photo of me exiting a federal building. The headline, "Is Ava Monroe under investigation again?" It should have died quickly. But it didn't. Because less than 24 hours later, the Senate Subcommittee on Foreign Investment announced a formal inquiry. Concerns regarding offshore financial ties, foreign ownership percentages, and political activity connected to Phoenix Capital's international expansion. The implication, espionage. The absurdity of it made me laugh at first, until the subpoenas started arriving. I sat in my office conference room, surrounded by my executive team, Jordan, Clara, Renata, and my newly reinstated Singapore coordinator, Daniel. The mood was tense. "This isn't just smoke," Jordan said. "They've engineered this." Clara slid a folder toward me. "Anonymous whistleblower complaint filed with the committee 2 weeks ago." claims Phoenix received unreported foreign donations from Middle East energy groups connected to known diplomatic entities. I blinked. We don't have any donations. Exactly, she said, which means it's fabricated. Daniel spoke up, voice low but steady. They're trying to discredit you globally before the next round of international partners signs on. Jordan nodded. It's a classic Monroe strategy. Tear down the person, not the plan. I leaned back, heart pounding but mind crystal clear. Which means Ellis is losing. Clara looked up sharply. He wouldn't go nuclear unless he was desperate. The story hit mainstream news within 48 hours. NBC, CNN, Politico. Every outlet ran some version of rising ESG CEO tied to foreign influence. Phoenix Capital under Senate scrutiny. Can Ava Monroe survive again? I issued a statement immediately. Clear, sharp, public. Phoenix Capital has never accepted funds from foreign governments or their proxies. We welcome this inquiry and will provide all records necessary to prove the truth. We were built on transparency, and we will stand on it. But I knew it wasn't enough, because this wasn't about truth. It was about perception, and perception in the court of public opinion doesn't wait for trials. We spent the next 10 days preparing a comprehensive audit. Every dollar, every transfer, every partner agreement since day one. Our legal team moved like a military unit. Jordan slept in the office. Clara worked her contacts in D.C. Daniel uncovered a trail of anonymous deposits to a PAC bearing my name. Deposits we never authorized. Whoever planted them knew how to leave just enough to suggest impropriety. It was masterfully done, and terrifying, because they weren't trying to punish me. They were trying to erase Phoenix. The worst blow came that Thursday. The city of Chicago froze our building permits for a $40 million mixed-income housing project in the South Side. Their reasoning? Pending outcome of federal review. This project had been years in the making. Hundreds of units, green spaces, job creation. And now, frozen. That night, I sat in the half-dark conference room, with a bottle of untouched water and a file of investor calls I hadn't returned. I'd stared down false headlines. I'd challenged my family. But this felt different. Like someone had found the fracture line inside me and just kept pressing. A knock broke the silence. Jordan entered. No clipboard. No phone. Just a chair. She sat across from me, folding her hands. Say it, I told her. You can walk, she said. Sell Phoenix. License the model. Keep your name clean. You think I care about my name? I think you care about not watching everything you built get torched for a lie. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking slightly. Do you think I should? No, she said. But I needed to know where your line is. I met her gaze. It's not here. 3 days later, I appeared before the subcommittee. The hearing room was packed. Lawyers, cameras, senators, staffers, and behind me, Jordan, Clara, Daniel, every Phoenix board member, every community partner I'd invited, every investor who refused to back down. We didn't look scared. We looked ready. The lead senator, a seasoned politician from Texas, looked down at me from behind his bifocals. Miss Monroe, are you aware of any unreported financial ties between Phoenix Capital and foreign governments? No, sir. Are you aware of any shell companies created to funnel influence into your investment programs? No, sir. Are you aware that a political action committee used your name and photo in fundraising efforts that received funds from embargoed entities? I am now, and I have filed criminal complaints with the FEC and the DOJ regarding unauthorized use of my identity. He leaned back. You've certainly come prepared. Yes, sir, I said, because I learned the hard way. What happens when you stay silent and hope truth speaks for itself? We presented everything. Bank records, legal contracts, testimonies, audits. We even brought in a third-party forensic accounting firm that had independently verified all our financial pathways. At the end of the day, the subcommittee chair made a simple statement. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. There is no basis for continued inquiry. Phoenix Capital is cleared. The room exhaled. But outside the chamber, waiting by the black Suburban, stood someone I hadn't expected. Chase, hair slicked back, tan suit. The Monroe smirk slightly dimmed. He offered me a nod. You're relentless, he said. You taught me that, I replied. He smiled. You should know. Ellis is pulling his money from Europe. He lost 3 backers this week. One of them blamed your Geneva dossier. Good, I said, stepping past him. Dad's asking about you, he added. I paused. Why? He says it's time someone in the family told the truth. For real. That night, back at Phoenix, the team celebrated with champagne and speeches. I stood quietly on the rooftop, looking out over the lights of Brooklyn, and I realized something. They couldn't bury me with lies. Not anymore. Because I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by a movement, built not on my name, but on truth, community, and a kind of fearless love for what we could build together. In the aftermath of the Senate hearing, Phoenix Capital felt more alive than ever. Our inbox was flooded with support. Investors who had pulled out came back. The city of Chicago reactivated our permits within 72 hours. We even received a message from the United Nations, inviting us to consult on a new global urban equity framework. It should have felt like victory, and for a moment it did, until I found the envelope. It was placed in my office mailbox. No postage, no markings, just my name, written in tight, slanted script. Ava. Inside were 2 items. A printed email, a photo of Daniel Young in a coffee shop, shaking hands with Ellis Monroe. The email was damning. It was from Daniel to Ellis, sent a month prior. The committee won't stick. They'll clear her. We need to push internally. I can still influence rollout timing. Slow things down from the inside. My throat went dry. I stared at the photo again. The timestamp was from the same week I had reinstated him. I didn't want to believe it. After everything, the confession, the suspension, the plea to return, had he really been playing both sides? Or was he coerced, manipulated, blackmailed? I needed the truth. But more than that, I needed to know who gave me the envelope. I called an emergency meeting with Jordan and Clara. Jordan read the email twice. We vetted Daniel, she said. Again. Everything checked out. Someone's playing us, Clara added. But which side? Let's find out, I said. We brought Daniel in that night. He looked confused, even concerned. Jordan remained silent as I slid the envelope toward him. His face shifted instantly. Not shock, recognition. This is taken out of context, he said. Quietly. Context? I asked. It looks pretty clear. He swallowed. I told Ellis I'd meet him once. I said I'd feed him bad intel, fake timelines, so he'd invest in dead-end cities and lose momentum. You went rogue. I was trying to fix what I broke, Daniel said. I thought if I could lead him off course, maybe I could protect you without needing to get approval. But I didn't tell you, because I knew how it would look. And the email? He hesitated. I sent it, but it wasn't what it seems. I planted that phrase about slowing rollout, so he'd think I was still on his side. Ava, I swear to you, I never sabotaged anything. I wanted to believe him, and a part of me did, but another part, the part that remembered being framed, abandoned, sacrificed, screamed, "Don't be stupid." Clara leaned forward. Why not tell us, Daniel? You had every chance, because I thought I could do this alone. I thought, if I failed, at least the damage would end with me. We suspended him again, this time indefinitely. Jordan would investigate the activity logs. Clara would draft a containment protocol. And I sat in my office, long after midnight, staring at the envelope. Someone had slipped it to me. Someone who wanted me to know. Someone inside Phoenix. 2 days later, I got my answer. A quiet ping on my private laptop. An anonymous note from a secure relay. You needed to see the truth, but you also needed to see what you're becoming. Are you building something new? Or just building vengeance in cleaner packaging? It ended with a quote. The knife you know cuts deeper. No signature, but I knew who it was. Sophia Lang, head of Phoenix Risk Division. Brilliant, soft-spoken, the kind of person who saw 12 moves ahead. She'd been my friend, my ally, and now, my mirror. I asked her to meet me. No office, no boardroom, just the cafe on 32nd Street, where we used to brainstorm Phoenix over oat milk lattes and sugar-free muffins. She arrived precisely on time. Neutral coat, no makeup, no apology in her eyes. I sat down, keeping my voice calm. Why? She stirred her coffee. Because you needed a decision point. You think I wouldn't have found out? You would have, she said. But later, after you trusted him more, after he might have done more damage. I clenched my jaw. You went behind my back. I protected the mission, she replied evenly. And I reminded you that we are the system now. The weight of her words hit me. Lay! We were the system now. So the question was, what kind of system were we building? One where suspicion ruled, where trust was a liability, or one where mistakes were human, and forgiveness wasn't weakness. Later that night, I took out a notebook. I wrote 3 names. Daniel, Sophia, me. Under each name, I wrote intention, action, consequence. Daniel had intended to help, acted without oversight, and caused confusion. Sophia had intended to protect, acted without transparency, and undermined leadership. I had intended to trust, acted too quickly, and now faced a team that didn't know where the lines were anymore. The next morning, I called another meeting. Everyone, entire leadership, no hierarchy. I stood in front of the room. No slides, no legal jargon, and I told the truth about Daniel, about the email, about the photo, about Sophia. And then I said this: Phoenix wasn't built to be perfect. It was built to be different. That starts with owning our mistakes and learning from them before we become the thing we swore we'd dismantle. I looked at Daniel. You'll stay suspended until a third-party audit clears you, but this door isn't closed. Then I looked at Sophia. You made a judgment call, one that protected me, but fractured our trust. That has to be rebuilt, together. And finally I looked around the room. No more secrets, no more silence. We rise together, or we fall apart. Afterward, Sophia approached me. I expected you to fire me. I thought about it. And Daniel, he'll either rebuild with us, or not. And you? I met her gaze. I'm still learning that leadership isn't about control. It's about courage. That night, I got a text from Daniel. I understand the suspension. I'll work with the auditors. I just want a chance to earn it back. I replied with 2 words. You will.
It was supposed to be a celebration. The Phoenix Sao Paulo project was ready to launch a first of its kind sustainable community complex featuring green housing, women-owned businesses, and a built-in equity model that let residents become partial stakeholders in their own development. The international press was calling it the human capital revolution. Our team had worked on it for nearly 2 years. And now, as the golden orange sun set behind the skyline of Villa Prudente, the neighborhood where we laid our foundation, I stood at the top of the new rooftop garden and watched families move into homes we had designed together. This, I whispered to myself, is what it was always about. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. As I stepped off the elevator to attend the Sao Paulo ribbon cutting ceremony, a woman stood near the entrance of our local Phoenix office, clutching an envelope. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, with rich brown skin, short silver hair, and eyes that studied me like she knew my name before I spoke it. You are Ava Monroe, she said softly in Portuguese accented English. Yes. She held out the envelope. I think it is time you know. I hesitated. Know what? Who your mother was. and why she left here. I returned to my hotel and opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. A group of young women stood in front of a small brick school, arms linked, smiling wide. My eyes went to the center of the photo, a girl maybe 19, tall, light brown curls, bright eyes, confident posture. My mother, Margaret Monroe, only it wasn't labeled that way. On the back of the photo in faded blue ink, it read Mariana Alves, 1977, Escola de Educadores Populares, School for Popular Educators, Mariana, not Margaret. I sat down, suddenly dizzy. I called my mother's sister Aunt Helen, the woman who had raised red flags about my father long before I did. It took 3 rings. Ava, she asked, confused. Is everything okay? I need to ask you something, I said, and I need the truth. That night we spoke for over an hour. She sighed, then confirmed what the photo suggested. Yes, she said. Your mother was born Mariana Alves, in Brazil. She never told me. She was going to. But your father, he didn't think it fit the narrative. Said it would complicate her image. So she changed her name before grad school. And no one thought I should know. She was waiting for the right time. Then she got sick, and Charles made it clear he'd protect the family's brand at all costs. I sat in silence, the truth crashing over me like cold water. So I'm half Brazilian. Yes, Aunt Helen said, her voice warm. And you come from strong women who fought for education, housing, and land rights. You didn't invent Phoenix, Ava. You inherited it. The next day, I returned to the Phoenix São Paulo headquarters. Waiting for me was the same woman from before. My name is Lucia Nascimento, she said. Your mother and I were in the same activist group in our youth. I was there when she left. Why did she leave? Because they threatened her. Powerful men, businessmen with ties to foreign corporations. They didn't like what we were doing. Organizing poor women, exposing corruption. My chest tightened. She received a scholarship to study in the US. It was her escape. We didn't know she'd disappear completely. She didn't disappear, I said, barely above a whisper. She was erased. Later, Lucia handed me a small binder, a collection of translated writings, letters, and even a few poems written by Mariana, by my mother. One line struck me like lightning. We must build futures not with concrete but with memory. If we forget the roots, the building falls. I canceled my flight back to New York. Instead, I walked through the neighborhoods my mother had once organized in. I met women who still ran food programs in her name. I visited the remains of the Escola de Educadores Populares. I saw her face on murals, worn but still visible beneath the peeling paint. And for the first time, I felt like I truly understood her. Her quiet fire, her relentless empathy, her refusal to let injustice shape her daughter. That weekend, I stood on the Phoenix São Paulo stage at the official launch ceremony. Cameras flashed, journalists gathered, but I scrapped the speech I'd prepared. Instead, I held up the photo. This, I said, is Mariana Alves. Most of you know her as Margaret Monroe. My mother, a daughter of Brazil. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She changed her name to survive, but she never stopped fighting. And everything Phoenix stands for: transparency, community, ownership. I learned from her, from this soil, from these streets, from you. Tears welled in several eyes. Lucia stood in the front row, nodding softly. I came here to launch a building, I said, voice shaking, but instead I found roots. That night I received hundreds of messages, most from local women, activists, and educators. But one stood out. It was from my father. A simple text: your mother would be proud. So am I. Back in New York, the energy had shifted. The story of Mariana Alves had gone viral. Not scandalous, not divisive, but redefining. For the first time, the world saw Phoenix Capital not just as a business, but as a legacy. Not of wealth, but of resistance. At our next board meeting, I shared what I'd learned. Jordan leaned forward. Are you okay? I'm not the person I thought I was, I said. But maybe that's a gift. Clara smiled. You're not changing the story, Ava. You're finishing one your mother started. That afternoon, I renamed our São Paulo project. Residencia Mariana, a permanent tribute, a living structure, a foundation built on truth. 2 weeks after the Mariana launch, I returned to New York to find an envelope waiting for me on my desk. This time it wasn't anonymous. It bore the seal of the World Economic Accord. We, an elite international council, shaping global finance policy and sustainability initiatives. The closest thing Earth had to a board of directors. I had spoken at WA panels before. I'd consulted on urban development for a few of their think tanks. But this was different. Inside the envelope was a formal letter. Dear Miss Monroe, the Council of the World Economic Accord unanimously invites you to join as Director of Global Equity and Emerging Markets Innovation. Your leadership at Phoenix Capital has redefined ethical investment practices and demonstrated actionable solutions to inequality. We believe your voice belongs not only in policy discussions, but in the rooms where the next 50 years of economic history will be written. Term 5 years, location Geneva. With global travel compensation, $5.2 million annual base, plus equity and grant control. Start date negotiable. With great respect and anticipation. Jonas Richter, Chair, World Economic Accord. I read it twice, then a third time, and still it didn't feel real. The WEA was untouchable, invitation only. Half the world's biggest social impact treaties started there, and now they wanted me, not just in the room, leading. But my first feeling wasn't pride, it was fear, because accepting this meant stepping away from Phoenix, at least day to day. It meant letting go of the company I'd built from the ashes, the team I'd fought beside, the name I'd reclaimed. Could I do more out there than I could right here? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I scheduled a walk through Phoenix's new Detroit housing project, a collaboration with local artists, engineers, and city planners to turn an abandoned industrial corridor into modular living spaces powered by geothermal energy. As I walked through the streets, I saw a mural of a Black mother holding a blueprint and a baby at the same time. Spray painted above her head were the words, "We are what we build." That night, I met with my leadership team. We sat around the same table we'd used in our first Brooklyn loft office, now preserved in the corner of our new Manhattan HQ. I got an offer, I told them, from the World Economic Accord. Jordan blinked. To speak, to lead. A new global initiative. 5 years. Geneva. Silence. Then Renata said what we were all thinking. If you go, what happens to Phoenix? Clara leaned forward, calm but firm. We've built structure, depth, talent. You leaving doesn't mean we fall, but it changes everything, Jordan added. I nodded. I know. Then I looked at them. Do you think I should do it? Daniel spoke, his voice quieter, more grounded than ever. I think we always told people to grow without fear. If you say no because you're scared we'll break, that's not trust, that's fear. That night I sat in my apartment staring at the city skyline. Phoenix had given me everything. Redemption, purpose, legacy. But maybe its greatest gift was showing me that I wasn't the only one who could lead. That sometimes a true leader knows when to step back, so others can step forward. The next morning I called Geneva. Miss Monroe, Jonas Richter's voice came through the phone with smooth warmth. Have you come to a decision? Yes, I said. I'll accept the offer, but on one condition. Name it. I bring my model with me, not just ideas, real frameworks, pilot programs, the Phoenix method, and I want veto power on any deals that could harm communities in the name of progress. There was a pause. Then you're exactly why we chose you, Ava. That afternoon, I gathered the entire Phoenix team in our open-air rooftop plaza. The sun was warm, the air still, and for once I wasn't giving a speech. I was telling the truth. I started Phoenix because I had nowhere else to go, because I was burned and bitter and alone. But I didn't build this alone. You did. Each of you took a risk on something that wasn't supposed to work. And together we turned it into proof that the system doesn't have to win. That money doesn't have to mean manipulation. That equity can mean ownership. And leadership doesn't have to mean control. I paused. I've accepted a position with the World Economic Accord.
I'm leaving day-to-day operations, but I'm not leaving you. Phoenix will continue. You will continue. And I'll fight for our values on a global scale, because you showed me what's possible. Tears, applause, shock, smiles, and then something unexpected. Jordan stepped forward. She handed me a plaque. It read for Ava Monroe, our founder, who turned ash into architecture and built a phoenix that flies on its own. That night, I walked the city alone, not to mourn, but to mark the transition. I stopped outside the Sterling building, the tower where my downfall began. It glowed in the distance, cold and corporate, and I didn't feel anger or grief or regret. I just felt ready. Ready to build not just from legacy, but into legacy. My last official act as CEO of Phoenix Capital was to rename our core leadership initiative, the Mariana Fellowship. Every year it would support 10 women globally who wanted to build what we built, in their language, in their city, on their terms. It would be ours forever. 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Geneva. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Because Phoenix was never just a company. It was a story. And I was no longer the only one telling it. The World Economic Accord headquarters in Geneva didn't look like power. It looked like glass. A sweeping structure of light and space, suspended above the edge of Lake Geneva like a ship made of air. Transparent, modern, elegant. The symbolism was clear. Power here didn't hide in marble columns or closed-door deals. It reflected. It shimmered. It watched you watching it. But as I stepped inside for my first day as Director of Global Equity and Emerging Markets Innovation, I knew better than to trust symbols. Glass still breaks. My new office was minimalist concrete, slate, and one massive window, with a view of Mont Blanc in the distance. A sleek desk. No personal photos. No Phoenix mementos. At least, not yet. There was a nameplate, though, and it said Ava Monroe, WE Council member. It still didn't feel real, until my assistant, a sharp polyglot logistics expert named Elodie, appeared at the door with my first agenda packet. 3 days until the Global Capital Inclusion Summit, she said briskly. Your panel's at 10 a.m. You'll be seated next to Mr. Akamoto from Tokyo Equity Group and Madame Okeke from Lagos Development Trust. I nodded. Anything else I should know? She paused, then added quietly. There are whispers you're being tested. Tested. I expected that. I wasn't one of them. Not a legacy banker. Not a diplomat's daughter. Not a polished European heir to a gold-plated foundation. I was the Phoenix girl. The whistleblower. The outsider who got too loud. And now, they wanted to see if I'd fold or if I'd burn everything down again. The summit began with fireworks. Not literal, but verbal. By day 2, I'd been invited into 4 backroom discussions, 3 press briefings, and 1 controversial vote. The issue? A multilateral investment package for post-conflict infrastructure in Eastern Africa. The problem? The proposal favored mega conglomerates with histories of labor abuse, wrapped in greenwashed language and shiny projections. I read the documents carefully, too carefully, for some. Because when I raised my hand in a closed-door economic roundtable and said this model prioritizes risk mitigation for investors over dignity for people, and it's dressed up in ESG language to avoid scrutiny, the silence was deafening. Then came the brushback. A silver-haired executive from Berlin raised an eyebrow. Miss Monroe, these agreements are based on proven frameworks. Proven to work for whom? I asked. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Later that night, I got a message from Jonas Richter, the WEA chair. Come to the East Terrace. Now, I found him standing alone, overlooking the lake, sipping espresso from a tiny porcelain cup. You made an impression today, he said without turning. I told the truth. He finally looked at me. And you plan to keep doing that? Yes, I replied. Otherwise, I should have stayed at Phoenix. He studied me for a moment, then handed me a file. Inside was a classified draft, a quiet proposal for a WEA oversight commission on ethical compliance, one that had been stalled for 6 years due to political infighting. I fought for this before, Jonas said, but I didn't have the teeth to push it through. And now you think I do. I think you know how to make it hurt. I think you know how to make it real. The next day, I presented the proposal to the Strategic Initiatives Committee. The room was made of steel and silence, but I was ready. This commission won't just advise, it will audit, it will track, it will hold us accountable to the values we say we champion. I clicked through the slides. Each one showed a different project. One that claimed sustainability, but delivered exploitation. One that praised equity, but funneled power to the usual suspects. And then I said, if we can't look ourselves in the mirror of the future and say we tried to build fair, not just fast, then we're not architects. We're decorators on a burning ship. Someone murmured. She's quoting her own TED Talk. I smiled. Because it's still true. The vote didn't happen right away. Instead, the resistance came. Polite, subtle, bureaucratic, needs more data. Perhaps it's too early for this model. We should explore non-binding frameworks first. But I wasn't new to these dances. I danced them in boardrooms where my own name was erased from plaques. I helped mount, so I did what I always did. I let the people speak. I released the full Oversight Commission plan to the public, translated into 15 languages, paired with real stories, testimonies from Phoenix partners across Brazil, Kenya, Indonesia, Detroit. I held a virtual town hall with over 10,000 grassroots organizers. I invited journalists. I answered hard questions. And suddenly WEA had a PR situation on its hands. People weren't asking why Ava Monroe was pushing this. They were asking why no one else had pushed it sooner. By the time the formal vote happened, I was nervous. Not because I feared failure, but because I feared the cost of winning. Would they cut my influence, freeze me out, make me ceremonial? But when the final tally came in, the vote passed, 12-3. The WEA Oversight and Equity Commission was born, and they named me its first chair. That night, Jonas met me in the empty council hall. No press, no champagne, just 2 chairs and the sound of distant lake waves. You did what I couldn't, he said. No, I replied. I just reminded them who's watching. He handed me a small box. Inside was a carved obsidian phoenix. I had this made after your Sora launch. I hoped I'd get to give it to you one day. I nodded, emotion catching in my throat. Thank you. Weeks passed. The commission began its work. WEA partners restructured deals. Countries renegotiated. Investment firms rewrote ESG policies to match our compliance codes. One global bank even pulled out of a multi-billion-dollar deal with a known violator, because the risk of exposure had finally become greater than the price of complicity. But one morning, Elodie appeared at my door, pale. There's a leak, she said. Of what? Internal memos, commission documents, early audits. Someone's trying to discredit the oversight program from the inside. I stood slowly. Do we know who? Not yet. But I have one name showing up in flagged correspondence. She paused, then whispered it, Clara Fielding. The moment Elodie whispered Clara's name, my body went still, not from shock, not from disbelief, but from a kind of grief. Clara Fielding had been with me from the beginning. She'd backed me when Sterling erased me. She stood beside me on the rooftop the night we launched Phoenix. She helped build the architecture behind our equity systems. And now she was at the center of an internal leak, designed to sabotage the very commission I was leading. Are you sure? I asked quietly. Elodie nodded. We triple-checked the metadata. The documents were accessed using her credentials, her secure channel. A total of 4 transfers, all routed through an offshore relay. Who received them? A shell account. But we're tracing it. Trace harder. I called an emergency meeting that evening. Just me, Jordan, and Elodie. Jordan reviewed the audit logs herself. As she scrolled through line after line of encrypted traffic and relay chains, I could see the tension gathering in her jaw. Finally, she looked up. She didn't do this accidentally. These weren't files you stumble into. She targeted oversight drafts, internal compliance reports, and your direct messaging log with Jonas. My stomach turned. She wanted leverage. Elodie nodded. Or someone asked her to get it. For hours we debated what to do. Bring it to Jonas. Go straight to the council. Speak to Clara directly. But the answer came the next morning. Clara called me. Her voice was calm, measured, too measured. Eva, she said, I heard there's concern about a leak. I just want you to know, if there's anything you need to ask me, ask. She was baiting me, testing if I knew, trying to preempt whatever was coming next. So I said nothing about Elodie's findings. Instead I said, let's talk in person, today. Of course, she replied. Willy Cafe? No, my office. 5 p.m. Come alone. She hesitated for half a breath. Then I'll be there. I spent the rest of the day reviewing every file Clara had ever touched. She'd advised Phoenix on 7 projects, helped negotiate 5 high-profile partnerships, sat on both the Phoenix board and the WEA advisory panel. She had access to everything, and in hindsight, she'd always positioned herself just behind me, never center stage, never questioned, always trusted. It was brilliant, it was deliberate, and it had gone unnoticed. Until now, at 4:58 p.m., Elodie. Clara entered my office. She wore a navy pantsuit, subtle gold jewelry, and the same calm expression that once made investors hand her their portfolios without reading the fine print. I waited until she sat. Then I slid the folder across the desk. Inside were the IP logs, the timestamps, the flagged files, the relay addresses, and a photo her laptop screen, captured from our internal surveillance backup. File transfer.xgb running in the background. She looked at it, didn't blink, then quietly said, So you found it. Silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why, but I waited. She folded her hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Then explain it. I was approached, she said, 6 months ago, before you came to WEA, a private lobbying group backed by 4 sovereign funds. Quiet money, old power, elite, I spat. Strategic partners, she corrected. They were worried about what you'd do here, about how far you'd push, so they asked for intel, leverage, just enough to keep you manageable. And you said yes? She looked me in the eye. I said yes because I thought I could control it. Feed them limited data. Stall them, keep them satisfied without harming anything real. But you did harm something. You broke trust. I know, she whispered. I stood pacing. You lied to me. I protected you. No, I said. Voice shaking. You managed me. Like they did. Like Sterling did. Like Ellis did. Her eyes flickered. I helped build this. Eva, I believed in it. I still do. Then why betray it? Because I didn't think you'd survive this place alone, she said. Voice rising. You think WEA is about ideas? It's a nest of snakes in tailored suits. You come in with a match and think they'll just let you burn down the old order? They'd rather kill the messenger. So you thought the only way to protect me was to betray me first. She didn't answer. I sat down, my throat raw, then asked the only question that mattered. Are you still working with them? No, she said. Not since the commission passed. They wanted it buried. I voted to pass it. I haven't sent anything since. Elodie's log confirmed it. The last transfer had been 3 days before the commission vote. Still, that didn't undo the date. I stood. You need to resign from Phoenix. Effective immediately. No press. No statement. Just go. Clara inhaled deeply, closed her eyes, then nodded. I understand. And WEA, I leave that to you. After she left, I sat alone for a long time. Grief hung in the air, but not the kind that came from losing us. This was the grief of losing someone who once stood beside you in the fire and walked away when it got too bright. That evening I met with Jonas. I handed him the file. He read it in silence. When he looked up, he didn't ask for justification. He simply said, we move forward, but now we know who we're moving around. The next day, a quiet internal memo was circulated.
Clara Fielding has stepped down from all leadership roles, effective immediately. We thank her for her contributions. No scandal, no spot, just erasure. The kind I once suffered, but this time earned. Phoenix continued. The commission strengthened, but I was different. More guarded, more deliberate, less trusting. Jordan noticed it. Are we losing you? She asked one evening. On a late-night video call. No, I said. You're getting the version that finally sees the cracks in the glass before it breaks. But in the quiet, when I was alone, I still saw Clara's face, not as a villain, but as a warning that even the strongest structures, trust, partnership, loyalty, can fracture in silence, not from malice, but from fear. And so I wrote a new mantra on the whiteboard in my Geneva office. Do not let fear become the blueprint. Because if I did, then everything we'd built, everything I was building, would become another empire. Made of shadow. 6 months into my term at the World Economic, everything changed. Phoenix Capital was thriving in my absence. Now led by Jordan and an expanded board, the oversight commission I chaired had grown into a force of accountability, pushing banks, development groups, and even a few governments to revise their ethical investment strategies. It was working. We were working. But power, even when wielded with good intent, draws shadows. And one found me on a rainy Thursday in Zurich. I was speaking at a closed-door summit with African and Southeast Asian development ministers when I noticed a man in a dark green raincoat watching from the gallery. Not an aide, not press, just still. After my talk, he followed me out into the hall. He didn't approach, just stood there, clutching a waterproof folder. It wasn't until I was halfway into my car that he stepped forward and said, with a faint accent, "You're Ava Monroe. You don't know me, but I have something that belonged to you. Must have that belonged to your mother." I froze. He handed me the folder, and just like that, walked away into the drizzle. Without saying another word, my security detail made a move to follow him. But I stopped them. "Let him go," I said, staring at the black plastic seal. Inside were 3 things: a faded journal bound in soft blue leather, an envelope with my mother's handwriting, addressed not to me, but to Alice Monroe, a key with a metal tag. Carter and LeBay, Deposit Box 44. Carter and LeBay was an old New York law firm. My father had mentioned them once, years ago during a discussion about a testate plan. They kept sealed documents, legacy records, things you never want to can't afford to show. That night I locked myself in my Geneva apartment and opened the journal. It was my mother's, written in Portuguese, mostly, but I could make out the rhythm of it. Her thoughts, her fears, her longing. One translated line made my breath stop cold. I was warned not to marry him, but I did. For the child, I thought I could protect Ava. I thought I could bury the past. But the past isn't a corpse. It's a seed. It grows where you least expect. What had she buried? What had she buried? What had she buried? And why was a letter addressed to Ellis tucked inside? I stared at the envelope for an hour, then finally opened it. Inside was a single page. _Ellis. You don't know the full story. Charles never told you. But if Ava ever finds this letter, it means the truth is finally catching up to the Monroes. The letter. Land in Sao Paulo wasn't just community land. It was our family land. Stolen, bought for pennies through corrections, and used to fund Carter's first manufacturing venture. That money built Sterling. That money built everything. _Ava was never just born into power. She was born into stolen power. And that means she has a choice to make. Bury the truth, or build something better. There underscore and my stomach dropped. Everything we'd built. Phoenix the commission. The Monroe. I had reclaimed. It was all built on a lie, or at least on stolen ground. The next morning, but I flew to New York. I didn't tell Jonas. I didn't tell Joe. I just booked a commercial seat and traveled alone. 3 hours after landing, I stood inside the stone-walled records room of Carter and LaVey. The vault keeper, an old man with thick glasses, looked at the key. And you're Monroe's daughter. Yes, he gave a slow nod. Box 44 hasn't been opened in 28 years. He brought it out on a rolling cart. It was heavier than expected. Inside were a land deed from Sao Paulo, 1974, a ledger of offshore payments to Brazilian officials, a signed letter from Charles Monroe, confirming purchase of the land, under terms considered irregular, but effective. Another envelope, this one sealed in wax, marked for Ava. Only open when you're ready. I opened it right there. Was from my father, underscore Ava. If you're reading this, it means the story couldn't stay buried. I always told myself it didn't matter. That all success was dirty at the start. That everyone won the name of survival, underscore. But that lemon wasn't mine to take, and it wasn't yours to inherit. I buried it in legal code and financial walls, and I watched your mother grieve every inch of it, underscore. I tried to keep it from you. Not because I thought you'd be, but because I knew you'd be strong enough to do something with it. Maybe something better than I ever could. Dad underscore.
I sat down on the cold tile floor and cried. Not because I was angry, not because I was ashamed, but because I finally understood the full truth. Phoenix wasn't just my response to a personal betrayal. It was my atonement even before I knew what I was atoning for. That night, I returned to Brooklyn. Phoenix HQ hadn't changed. Warm light, open spaces, the rhythm of reinvention humming through every wall. I met Jordan in the executive suite. She saw my face and said, "What happened?" I told her everything. The land, the theft, the ledger, the truth. She didn't flinch. "Then, let's give it back," she said. And we did. We filed legal action to return the land deed to the community council in Sao Paulo. We pledged $120 million in restitution and reinvestment. And I went public with a statement. I was born into a lie, but I'm choosing to build with the truth. Not to erase the past, but to plant something new over it. Something that can't be bought or stolen, only shared. The response was global. Some called me reckless, others called it historic, but most just said, "Finally." Weeks later, as I returned to Geneva, Jonas met me with a newspaper under his arm. Front page, Monroe returns stolen land, a new blueprint for corporate accountability. He raised an eyebrow. "You realize you just set a precedent." "Good," I said. "Let them follow it." The headlines were everywhere. Monroe returns stolen land. Corporate accountability or media ploy. WIA director defies global precedent by admitting ancestral wrongdoing. Phoenix founder Ava Monroe faces pushback from corporate giants after landmark restitution. In Sao Paulo, I was being called a hero. In Geneva, a disruptor. In certain circles in New York, a problem. I knew this would come. Power doesn't lose quietly. It roars as it falls. And now the walls were shaking. The first blow came at a WEA committee hearing. A delegate from the Callahan family, one of the oldest investment dynasties in the United States, leaned back in his chair and asked, "Miss Monroe, can you confirm whether the recent restitution of your family's holdings was influenced by pending litigation?" I blinked. "There is no litigation," I replied. He smiled. "Not yet. I knew that smile. I'd seen it before, on boardroom predators who smiled just before pulling the rug out. That evening, Jonas called me into his office. He looked graver than I'd ever seen him. "They're coming for you," he said. "Who?" "The Callahans, and others like them. You've made restitution fashionable. You've made the old guard look criminal. And they won't survive that narrative unless they break the woman who started it." I nodded slowly. "What are they planning?" He slid me a printed news release, embargoed but leaked. The headline: WEA official implicated in insider dealings through Phoenix Capital Holdings. I read the body. I read it again. They were accusing me of using Phoenix assets to inflate my reputation, funneling funds through shell NGOs in Brazil to quietly recapture market influence while claiming to give land away. It was a fabricated scandal, but it was framed perfectly. Real accounts, cherry-picked data, transactions twisted out of context, and the media, they'd eat it up. "They've buried the truth in so many half-truths," I whispered. Jonas sighed. "That's the play. To make the lie complicated enough that no one can untangle it before the damage is done. They want to impeach me from WEA, don't they?" "Yes," he said. "And smear Phoenix while they're at it." I spent the next week in a war room. Jordan flew in from New York. Renata from Sao Paulo. Elodie didn't sleep. We opened every file, cross-checked every donation, expense, timestamp. We created a full ledger of Phoenix financials, audited, time-stamped, unassailable. But the Callahans had something we didn't. Noise. They had reporters, think tanks, former insiders, and paid analysts pumping out stories and doubts at every turn. The story wasn't "Is Ava innocent?" It became "How guilty is she?" Then came the subpoena. WEA's internal ethics committee launched a formal inquiry into my position and integrity. And just like that, I was under review. One night, I stood at the window of my Geneva apartment, staring out at the dark lake. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Sitchin, they did the same thing to your mother. Only difference is, she ran. Will you?" I didn't respond. I didn't sleep. But I didn't run. The next morning I held a press conference, not to defend, to dismantle. I brought the full Phoenix ledger projected onto a massive screen behind me. I walked the press through every accusation, line by line, wire by wire. Then I paused and said, "This isn't just about me. It's about fear. The fear of accountability, the fear of women who don't flinch, the fear of progress that can't be bought off." Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, but I held my ground and finished with, "If telling the truth makes me dangerous, then let them be terrified." 3 days later, a whistleblower came forward. A former Callahan legal aide, anonymously, released internal emails showing the fabricated scandal had been orchestrated months in advance. The plan? Create doubt, stir questions, push for Ava's removal to delay global restitution discussions for at least 5 years. Within hours, every headline changed. Monroe cleared. Global conspiracy, exposed in corporate leak. Callahan family facing congressional inquiry. After sabotage plot surfaces, the Callahan name, once unshakable, was now tied to corporate espionage, abuse of media platforms, and global obstruction. At WEA, the ethics committee dropped the case. Jonas issued a public apology, and for the first time since joining, I was given full vote privileges and unanimous support to lead the next global development directive. But I didn't celebrate. I visited my mother's old school in Sao Paulo, now rebuilt with Phoenix funds, and renamed the Escola Mariana Livre. And in front of a class of 12-year-old girls, I spoke not about power or legacy, but about truth. When the lie is loud, be louder.
but not with rage, with proof, because someday you'll be accused. And when that day comes, you won't win by being likable. You'll win by being undeniable. The invitation arrived in a crimson envelope, hand-delivered by a WEA courier. No stamps, no creases, just one line embossed in gold foil. You are requested to serve as a co-author of the Global Accord on Equitable Capital. This was no ordinary treaty. This was the treaty. A document 10 years in the making, meant to redefine global financial ethics, trade standards, and investment practices, crafted not just by economists, but by leaders, human rights lawyers, and grassroots organizers. It would sit beside the Geneva Conventions and the Paris Climate Accords. And now, I had been invited to shape its spine. Jonas sat beside me in the WEA atrium as I read the letter. They want you, he said simply. No, I replied. They want my voice, my reputation, what I symbolize. He smiled. Same thing now. For weeks I buried myself in drafts, white papers, conflict models, and ethics codes. We worked in a sealed chamber dubbed The Circle, a glass-walled think tank, high above Geneva, where nothing left the room without approval from all 12 contributing authors. I wasn't the only reformer in the room. There was Dr. Zainab Mbatha, who rewrote the debt forgiveness model for sub-Saharan Africa, Alonso Reyes, who cracked open the Panama Papers with his investigative team. And then on the third day, she walked in, Clara Fielding. I hadn't seen her since her quiet resignation, but there she was, wearing soft gray, no jewelry, eyes lowered but steady. She had been invited to co-author by a separate block, one that argued her years at Phoenix and WEA still made her too valuable to ignore. My throat tightened. Jonas looked at me. I didn't know. It's fine, I whispered. She's not the threat anymore. But I was wrong. She was the key. Over the next 5 days, Clara spoke only when necessary, measured, clinical, unemotional. She contributed sharp phrasing for economic ethics clauses. She challenged vague accountability structures, and she never looked me in the eye. Until the 6th night, I stayed late in the circle, reviewing cross-border compliance policy wording when she approached. She slid a folder onto the table beside me. No greeting, just a quiet, read this, before tomorrow's clause vote. Then she left. I opened the folder. Inside were pages of internal communications between members of the Treaty Committee, the European Central Policy Bank, and the Sovereign Advisory Group in Singapore. One message, time-stamped and marked confidential, stood out. Clause 47 must include carve-outs for existing sovereign lenders. No full transparency, otherwise we walk. Clause 47 was my section, the heart of the treaty. It mandated full transparency on all cross-border development loans, requiring governments and corporations to report real terms, conditions, and third-party beneficiaries. If they carved it up, the treaty would be another hollow document, pretty, meaningless. I met Clara on the terrace that night. Why are you giving me this? I asked. Because I owe you one last truth, she said. This clause, it's why they brought me in. They knew you'd fight for full transparency. They wanted someone to soften the language, to neutralize you. I stared at her. You agreed to that. She didn't answer. Instead, she offered something worse. They'll remove you if you resist. They'll use the Callahan scandal as proof you're too controversial to represent neutrality. But if you back off, you can stay, finish the treaty, guide it from within. My blood went cold, and if I don't, they'll tear Clause 47 out, rewrite it behind your back, and pin it on procedural vote changes. The ultimatum was clear: stay and surrender your core principle, or fight and risk the treaty without you. That night, I sat alone in the silent chamber of the circle, all 12 chairs empty, all 12 drafts glowing faintly on the central screen. And I remembered something my mother once said in her journal. If they offer you a seat at their table, but demand you forget your own recipe, it's not a seat, it's a trap. The next morning, I made my choice. I walked into the committee hall and laid the folder Clara had given me on the table. Before we vote, I said, there's something everyone in this room deserves to see. One by one, they read the leaks. Some were furious, some silent, some scared. And then I stood and said, Clause 47 is not negotiable. Without it, this treaty becomes a story we tell the public, while we continue laundering injustice in private. I didn't come here to decorate the system. I came here to renovate it. The room was tense. Then Alonso Reyes spoke. If she's out, I'm out. Then Zayn, me too. And one by one, 9 of the 12 co-authors agreed. The bloc that wanted carve-outs, suddenly powerless. Clause 47 passed in full, unanimously. Later, as we walked out of the room, Clara stopped beside me. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it because I couldn't watch them win twice. I nodded. Still, thank you. The Global Accord on Equitable Capital was signed 3 months later, adopted by 61 countries, endorsed by the UN, ratified into national law in 17 jurisdictions within a year. Clause 47 became its most cited provision. On the 1-year anniversary of its adoption, I stood in front of the United Nations and gave a speech that echoed around the world. They thought equity was a favor. We made it a law. They thought transparency was dangerous. We made it permanent. And when they tried to write us out of history, we rewrote the book. I thought I had made peace with the past. The land had been returned. Phoenix was thriving. Clause 47 was law. I had exposed, dismantled, and rebuilt legacies that were never meant to be questioned. But one night, while reviewing diplomatic briefings in my Geneva apartment, LOD appeared at the door. Her face was pale, hands shaking slightly. There's something you need to see, she said, and placed a simple brown envelope on my desk. It had no return address, just one word, handwritten on the front, Ava. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 15 years. Slanted, tidy, soft loops on capital letters. It was Lily's, my sister, the one who used to braid my hair before school, the one who once sat on my hospital bed for 2 straight days when I broke my ankle, the one who stopped speaking to me the moment our father's empire began to fall. I opened the envelope. Inside were 5 pages. No greeting, no signature, just raw, unfiltered words. Underscore Ava. I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you'll read it if it does. But I need you to know the truth. Not about business, or Phoenix, or BUA, but about us. When Dad's empire collapsed, I stayed. I stayed in the mess. I held Mom's hand while her mind slipped away. I walked through boardrooms, filled with men whispering your name like a curse and a myth. I saw what they did to you. I saw what they said, and I still didn't call. Why? Because I was angry. Because you left, and you built a life without us. Because you stopped being my sister, and became a symbol. And for a long time I hated you for that. But over the years, I saw your speeches. I read the documents. I watched you give away everything we thought made us powerful, and somehow end up more powerful than any of them. And I realized something. You didn't abandon us. You escaped. And I was too scared to follow. I stayed because it was familiar. You left because you were brave. I miss you. I'm sorry I made silence my weapon. I hope it's not too late to start over. Lily I didn't realize I was crying until I looked down and saw the words beginning to blur. The kind of crying that sneaks up on you. Not loud, not dramatic, but honest. My hands trembled as I read it again, not because the words hurt, but because they were the exact words I had waited a lifetime to hear, and had stopped hoping for long ago. I didn't know what to do at first. I paced the floor. I stared at old photos on my phone, the 2 of us at our high school graduation, arms linked, smiling so wide it almost felt like we were invincible, but we hadn't been. We were just children in the shadow of a dynasty that expected perfection and punished softness. I went for a walk along Lake Geneva, cold wind brushing past, the moon silvering the water, and I remembered a moment, years ago, after our father's funeral. Lily and I had stood in the Monroe family estate, in silence. She had looked at the portraits on the wall, and said, "We'll never be like them." But then we were, for a while, until I broke it, until I left. The next day I wrote back, not a letter, a message. Simple, direct, asterisk, asterisk. "Lily, I got your letter. I read every word, and I believe you. I didn't build all of this to live without my sister. Let's start again. When you're ready, come find me. No press, no past, just us. Asterisk, asterisk." 1 week later, she showed up at Phoenix HQ. No entourage, no lawyer, just Lily, in jeans, a loose jacket, and eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed yet. We didn't speak, we just hugged, tight, long, like time hadn't passed, like we were still those girls who used to sleep on the floor of the Monroe Library with flashlights and secret snacks, reading spy novels under the table. That afternoon, we sat for hours. No talk of legacy, no politics, no scandals, just truth. She told me about our mother's decline, the confusion, the fear, the way she started calling Lily by my name near the end. She told me about the whispers at charity galas, the pity disguised as politeness, the way people asked, "How's your sister?" as a test, not a question. And I listened, really listened, because that's all she'd ever wanted. Before she left, I took her into the Phoenix Equity Lab, the place where we tested new models of financial fairness, where we built simulations for universal basic income, reparation-based economics, and next-generation capital ethics. She looked around in awe. All of this, you dreamed it." "No," I said. "We did." She looked confused. I smiled and pulled out a dusty sketchbook, one from our teenage years. Inside were our childhood scribbles, maps of imaginary cities, where every building had equal sunlight, notes about schools that taught kindness before algebra, and budgets for happiness centers instead of jails. We'd made them up in a world that didn't believe in such things. And now, they were blueprints. As she held the book in her lap, Lily whispered, "Maybe we weren't dreaming too big. Maybe we just grew into the size of our dreams." That night, she stayed at my apartment. No press knew, no statements made. It was just two sisters, watching old home videos and rediscovering the bond that had never truly died. And when I fell asleep, it was to the sound of her laughter echoing through the room, a sound I hadn't heard in 15 years, and one I never wanted to lose again. Ava Monroe had never been more respected. Her work on the Global Accord on Equitable Capital had redefined how nations approach development finance. Her face now appeared in textbooks, on banners at Davos, even on murals in Sao Paulo. She had become more than a financial visionary. She was hope made real. But power has a cycle, and the cycle always circles back to the next disruption. This time, it came wearing silicone. It was a quiet morning when Jonas burst into her Geneva office with a rare, almost childlike excitement. "They want you," he said breathlessly, "not just on a panel, to lead the new AI economic ethics treaty, global scope, unlimited resources, full design autonomy." Ava looked up from her tea. "Who's they?" "The Global Tech Accord, Google, EcoByte, Helix Corp, and others." She raised an eyebrow. "Which others?" Jonas hesitated. "Sterling Dynamics is on the advisory board." Silence. The name echoed like a ghost. Sterling, her father's company, the empire that discarded her, then collapsed. She stood and walked to the window, the silence between them thick as frost. "You knew I'd hesitate," she said. "I did, and you still brought it, because they need you, Ava. They're building predictive economic governance systems, AI that will manage resource allocation, global trade routes, even poverty responses. Without someone like you in the room, it becomes another tool for control, another empire with better code. And with me in the room, they'll hate it, but they won't be able to ignore it." 3 weeks later, Ava stood at the Geneva World Tech Summit, surrounded by glass, cameras, and coded whispers. The opening panel was titled, "Humanity 2.0, Who Gets to Program the Economy?" Each speaker had a title like Chief Ethical Architect or Algorithmic Sovereignty Lead. Ava's badge simply read, Ava Monroe, Economic Integrity Chair, but behind the curtains, it was more complicated. In a private pre-brief, Ava was introduced to the advisory board. Half were young, hopeful minds, the other half, corporate architects from the past, and at the head of the table sat Victor Langford, CEO of Sterling Dynamics' new tech division, polished, cold, eyes like steel. He extended a hand. Ava, I knew we'd cross paths again. She didn't shake it. Instead, she said, you're the reason I'm here, to make sure you never define the future again. The AI economic framework was ambitious. It would link financial ecosystems with climate data, migration trends, health forecasts, and resource availability, all moderated by machine learning. In theory, it could end hunger, optimize aid, and close inequality gaps by anticipating crisis before it happens. In the wrong hands, it could automate oppression. Ava knew that better than anyone. On day 3 of the summit, she was given access to the prototype AI model, codenamed Athena. At first it was impressive, clean outputs, smart forecasting. Then she ran a test, predict optimal resource reallocation model for Central Africa under rising inflation. Athena returned, divert labor incentives from regional farming to outsourced manufacturing, introduce incentive programs for international investment zones, prioritize high-yield returns over local stability for short-term gain. Ava froze. It was 1973, colonial economics, dressed in 2045 language, a script she'd fought to burn, now being written in code. She spent the night digging deeper. In the source logs, she found buried influence parameters, once programmed to favor established sovereign investors and legacy trade routes. Translation: the wealthy win faster, the poor become data points. She confronted the Athena design team the next morning. The lead engineer blinked in confusion. We didn't write that. No, Ava said, but someone funded it. That night, Victor Langford requested a private meeting. They met in a sky lounge above Lake Geneva. The lights below sparkled like a false promise. You've made quite a mess, he said, sipping wine. The board's worried. They should be, Ava said. This is the future, Ava. You don't stop the train. You just help lay the track. Not if it's headed off a cliff. Victor leaned in, voice low. Back off. Stay on the treaty. Refocus on regulation, not foundation. And in return, I'll give you full editorial credit. She laughed, not kindly. You want to buy me with a footnote? No, I'm offering you legacy. I already have that, she replied, standing. It's called truth. The next day, Ava took the stage, not to celebrate, to expose. In front of global press and the board, she projected the algorithm code that weighted AI predictions toward legacy investors. She showed the backdoor architecture, the influence parameters, the disguised privilege. And then she said, this isn't artificial intelligence. It's inherited inequality, automated. We cannot code ethics if the coders are blind to justice. This system will not manage humanity. It will replace it. Silence, then a storm. Within hours, Victor Langford was forced to resign. Sterling Dynamics Tech Division was suspended from the treaty. Ava was appointed to lead a new initiative, ethical architecture and AI governance. And Athena, it was rebuilt from the ground up, this time by a coalition of human rights groups, economists, and ethicists from 5 continents. Lily, watching from New York, texted her one line, "You just rewrote the code for the future." Ava replied, "Now we make sure everyone gets a hand on the keyboard." For years, Ava Monroe had treated her body like a reliable machine. Wake at 4:30 a.m., run 5 miles, green tea, work, negotiate, lid, repeat. But no machine runs forever. And when the silence between breaths grows sharp, you know something is coming undone. It started subtly, a cold that didn't go away, shivers in the boardroom, a slight tremble in her right hand as she signed the UN AI Ethics Addendum. Jonas noticed first. You're burning the candle from both ends, he said. I am the candle, she replied, with a tired smile, but the joke didn't land. 2 weeks later, she collapsed on the tarmac in Nairobi. The diagnosis, stage 2 adrenal burnout, a system so overdriven that her body had stopped producing the cortisol necessary to even stand for long. No travel, no speeches, no stress, the doctor said. Or the next collapse won't be something you get up from. It was the first time in 15 years Ava was ordered to rest, real rest, not pause while strategizing, not answer emails on IV drip, just stop. She retreated to a small property in the south of France, a vineyard cottage once owned by a reclusive historian who believed the best stories happen between the pages you don't read. Lily joined her after the first week, bringing herbal soups, silent card games, and old videos from their childhood. And slowly, Ava began to breathe again. But healing has a strange side effect, clarity, and clarity too often brings pain. It was late one night when Ava opened her secure work tablet to review old Phoenix admin logs, not because she was supposed to, but because she missed her own rhythm. And there it was, a flagged access alert from 6 months prior, an unauthorized duplication of Phoenix's South American Restitution Fund architecture, with IP traces leading to Lisbon, Portugal. She stared. There was only one person with both Phoenix clearance and ties to Lisbon, Renata, her former protege, the woman who had helped rebuild Phoenix from ashes, who had served as its global equity officer for 7 years. Ava's heart pounded as she pulled the audit trail. Renata had created a shadow mirror of the fund, siphoning microtransactions from every payout, redirecting them to a holding firm in Luxembourg, under an alias name, AM Forward Holdings. The initials stung, not Ava Monroe, but Annalise Moreira, Renata's birth name, before she changed it during their early work together. The total siphoned, $4.2 million, dispersed over 2 years, so thin, no one would have caught it, except Ava, because Ava had built the system. She didn't confront Renata immediately. She sat with it, thought, reflected. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a betrayal of mission. Phoenix wasn't a company, it was an idea, and someone who had helped plant its first seeds had stolen from its roots. When Ava finally called her, Renata answered like nothing was wrong. Boss, how's the French air treating you? Ava's voice was ice. We need to talk about Lisbon, about the fund, about AM Holdings. The line went silent. Then came a quiet breath. So you know, they met the next day. Neutral ground, a cafe in Geneva, with no cameras, no press. Renata didn't deny it. I got tired, she said. Tired of watching the world take. Tired of watching the rich evolve, while we patch holes. I didn't take from the poor. I took from the system, the one that was never going to pay us back. You took from the idea, Ava whispered. You took from the only honest thing we ever built. Renata's eyes filled. I believed in you, Ava. I still do. But belief doesn't pay for the therapy, the security, the fear. I've been threatened, tracked. My sister's kids were followed home from school after the Callahan collapse. You think they only target you? Ava's heart cracked. But you never told me. You would have told me to walk through it, to fight harder. And I didn't have another fight left. Ava had always known the cost of leadership. She just hadn't realized others were paying it in silence. She gave Renata a choice. Return every cent, publicly resign, or I take this to every regulator we ever worked with. Renata didn't argue. She just nodded and wept. The fallout was quiet. Renata resigned, with a vague statement about new directions. Phoenix restructured its internal audit protocol. Ava set up a new guardian cell, an ethics oversight board, led by 3 independent directors, with full power to investigate any future anomalies. But something had shifted. Ava now understood what no treaty could teach. You can build the most honest empire, but if you don't care for the humans inside it, it will rot anyway. As she returned to full health, Ava changed her approach. Less podium, more presence. She started weekly check-ins with her global directors, not about numbers, but about well-being. She added a line item to every Phoenix budget, burnout insurance, and she created a fund, anonymous, protected, for whistleblowers, caregivers, and mission-fatigued employees who needed a safe place to breathe before they broke, because the greatest threat to revolution is exhaustion. One morning, as she walked through Phoenix's HQ in Brooklyn, a young intern approached her with trembling hands and a nervous voice. I just wanted to say thank you, not for the work, but for protecting people like me. Ava smiled. You don't owe me thanks, she said, but you do owe the world your truth. So when your time comes, don't whisper. Stand.
It began in silence, as most disasters do. A strange bloom of red over satellite maps in eastern Africa, a sudden break in the monsoon cycle, and came the flood maps, the famine projections, the panicked climate models. The earth had buckled again. This time, the drought swept across three nations: Ethiopia, Sudan, and Eritrea, killing crops, choking rivers, and sending over 18 million people into what the media dubbed the slow exodus. But it wasn't slow. Entire villages vanished in days, water lines dried, borders tightened, and humanitarian aid systems, broken by years of red tape and outdated logistics, failed almost instantly. Phoenix Global was not a rescue agency. It was built for equity, not emergency. But Ava didn't hesitate. Within 24 hours, she activated a code she drafted years earlier. Never used, never tested. A single word: Exodus. The protocol was radical. It linked Phoenix's economic architecture with AI geolocation data, private drone networks, independent supply chains, and local community mapping. It bypassed governments, bypassed corrupt intermediaries, went direct. Food, water, relocation, digital identity systems, coordinated through an encrypted ledger designed for speed and transparency. In 2004, it would have been science fiction. In 2045, it was desperation with a signal tower. But not everyone applauded. 3 days after Exodus launched, a complaint was filed with the Global Economic Stability Council. The accusation: unauthorized cross-border logistics by a non-state actor. The complainant: Sterling Dynamics. Their new CEO, a slippery ex-banker named Jared Crest, had been quietly rebuilding Sterling's influence through infrastructure contracts in the very region now destabilized. Exodus had disrupted billions in planned aid-for-profit deals. Crest called Ava a rogue technocrat, said Phoenix was a privatized empire hiding behind moral theater. He called for her detainment. The media went feral. Headlines divided the globe. Ava Monroe, savior or sovereign? Tech queen defies global borders in daring aid operation. Monroe's exodus, humanitarian heroism or dangerous overreach? Behind closed doors, Ava faced a storm. We called for an emergency session. The UN froze certain Phoenix operating accounts. 5 nations issued warrants for her arrest if she entered their borders. And in the middle of it all, the drought deepened. Exodus was the only thing standing between 18 million people and nothingness. Ava met with Jonas, Lily, and Elodie in a secure Geneva satellite office. She was pale, exhausted, eyes like flint. We pull Exodus, Jonas said softly, and millions suffer. We push forward, Lily said, and they'll try to make you a global outlaw. Ava stood. We don't get to build these systems and then shrink when they're finally needed. I didn't fight for 20 years to defend an idea. I fought to defend people. Jonas looked at her with a familiar fear. And if they come for you? Ava's voice didn't waver. Then they'll have to explain to the world why they arrested the only woman who showed up with clean water. The next 48 hours changed history. Phoenix worked with a coalition of citizen drone pilots, underground internet nodes, and decentralized community leaders. In 12 days, Exodus evacuated over 6 million people to climate-safe zones in Kenya, Rwanda, and protected urban corridors in northern Uganda. Each family received biometric protection IDs, resource credits, and trauma counseling, all managed through encrypted Phoenix terminals. No flags, no politics, just relief. But Sterling wasn't finished. Jared Kress launched a PR war, pumping billions into anti-Phoenix media, claiming Ava's teams had destabilized the region. He hired lobbyists in Brussels and Washington. Ava was summoned to the International Human Rights Tribunal for questioning. And then, someone leaked drone footage of her walking through a ruined Sudanese village, handing water to a barefoot boy and pressing a phoenix patch to his chest. The image went viral. One woman standing in dust surrounded by wreckage, still fighting. The caption read, "While they debate, she delivers." Global protests erupted in Ava's defense. #I stand with Exodus trended across 92 countries. Artists painted murals of her in Syria, Brazil, and Oakland. Ava refused to respond to the media. Instead, she published a letter to the people of Earth. It read, "I don't want your statues, I want your systems to evolve. If I broke a law, then the law was not written for the living. I will not apologize for delivering what your policies withheld. This is not humanitarianism. This is justice. And if you must choose between obeying power or saving a child, you already know the answer." The tribunal dropped all charges. Sterling was fined and blacklisted from emergency contracting for 5 years. Exodus was adopted as a blueprint for rapid response aid systems worldwide. Ava was offered a Nobel Peace Prize. She declined. "The work is not done," she said. "Give it to the mothers who carried their children across the desert without shoes." Later that year, the boy from the drone footage, now living in Nairobi, sent Ava a drawing. It showed her with wings, holding up a burning world with one hand and a water bottle in the other. He wrote, "Miss Ava, you look like an angel but also a superhero. Thank you for the water and the map. I want to build cities like you someday." She framed it above her desk, right next to her father's old stock certificate from Sterling Dynamics, now crossed with a red line that simply read, "Debt repaid." Ava Monroe stood in silence, staring out across a room that didn't know it was about to say goodbye. The Global Equity Summit in Montreal was the largest of its kind. Over 3,000 of the world's foremost policymakers, scientists, activists, economists, and students had gathered. And at the very end of the summit, there was one final name on the schedule: the Ava Monroe closing address. The future we owe. But what the program didn't say, what no one knew, was that this would be her last. Not just her last keynote, her last act as head of Phoenix Global. She'd made the decision quietly, during a midnight walk through Brooklyn's Phoenix campus 2 months earlier. The buildings glowed with ambition. Inside were the systems she dreamed of: predictive economic models, trauma-centered financial education, circular housing grants, all built and led by people who no longer needed her permission. And that was the sign. "Legacy isn't about what you create," she'd written in her private journal that night. "It's about knowing when to step away so it can live without you." She had spent 2 decades fighting empires, building one of her own, but now it was time to hand it over. There was only one person she wanted to take her place: Elodie Baines, the once shy data analyst who had become Ava's fiercest policy architect, the woman who rewrote refugee finance, who stood beside her during Exodus, who had never asked for power, which made her the only one who could be trusted with it. Ava asked her to meet at a small rooftop cafe 2 weeks before the summit. She handed her a single slip of paper. Elodie opened it. "Read the words." Her hands trembled. You're serious?" "I'm ready," Ava said softly. "But are we ready? You've been ready for years. You just didn't know because I was still here."
The days before the summit were surreal. Lily, now managing climate migration analytics for the UN, flew in to help her prepare. Jonas wept openly when she told him the news. "You're the only constant I've ever had," he whispered. Ava smiled. "Then let me teach you the final principle." "What's that?" "No great structure stands forever, but a strong foundation makes it impossible to forget it ever stood." On the day of her final address, Ava wore black, not as mourning, as honor, a nod to every architect of rebellion who had once been told you can't, and answered with "Watch me." The hall was packed. The crowd rose as she entered. Thunderous applause. But Ava didn't smile. Not yet. She walked slowly to the podium, placed her speech folder down, and looked up. Then paused. For a full 10 seconds, she said nothing. Then, "Do you remember where you were when you realized the system was never built for you?" The room went still. "I remember. I was 16. My school told me I was too emotional to lead the economics club. My father told me I could inherit his company, but only if I acted more like a man. Every door had a lock, and every key had a condition." She looked down, took a breath. "So I stopped asking for permission. I built my own house, and I made sure every room had windows. For 20 years, I fought to make those windows bigger, so others could see the world they were told they'd never reach." The audience leaned in. "And now it's time for me to walk through the last door, not because I'm tired, but because you are ready. This fight, this mission, this phoenix, it was never mine. I was just the first spark. Today I'd pass the fire." A hush fell over the room. Ava gestured to the side of the stage. From the shadows, Elodie stepped forward. Gasps. Applause again, this time softer, stunned. "This is Elodie Baines," Ava said. "She will now lead Phoenix Global. She will build systems I never dreamed of, and I will cheer her on. Not as a founder, not as a boss, but as a believer." Elodie took the mic with shaking hands. "I only have one thing to say," she said, eyes shining. "Thank you, Ava, not for trusting me, but for proving that a different world isn't fiction. It's just unfinished. Now it's our turn to write the next page." Afterward, the press called it the most graceful exit in activist history. Ava refused interviews. She walked quietly out the back, into the evening light, where Lily was waiting. Together they strolled down the old city streets. That night, back at her apartment, Ava lit a single candle on her balcony, and finally read the last line of her own journal, written long ago, when Phoenix was just an idea. "One day I will vanish and no one will notice, because the world will be louder with justice than with my name." She closed the book, watched the flame flicker, and whispered, "Good. That's how it should be." Years later, children would study the rise of Phoenix Global in school books. They'd see images of a woman standing alone in dust, holding water, or testifying before a tribunal with tears and truth in her voice, or standing beside a young woman at a podium, passing the torch. But they'd never fully know what it cost. How many nights were spent alone? How many betrayals were endured? How many times she had to silence her own pain to amplify others? They wouldn't know, because Ava never told them. She didn't need to. The world she left behind told the story for her. And somewhere beneath the earth, where old data is stored and time forgets names, a final line of ledger code glows in the Phoenix archive. Ava Monroe // status. Retired Systems Functional Humanity. Online.